very distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be able to tease out from this very distinguished panel some reflections on the subject of Africa's competitiveness and the role of leaders in making this happen. Clearly, from the presentations from Dr. Yumkela and President Obasanjo, we see some of the challenges that African leadership have to deal with. But this panel of experts can give us a perspective outside of that leadership of why there isn't an ideology of development that seems to dominate leadership ethos in Africa. Why is being able to make my country more competitive than another, and therefore a growth node, if you will, not a dominant issue in our selecting, electing, or whatever words we use, our leaders? Maybe I should start from Toyosi, giving a perspective, who has worked with a lot of young people, is one of the young people of our country, to give us a sense for what young people think why leadership selection is not oriented that way.
Thank you very much, Professor Pastor. Happy birthday, sir. The first thing I'll say is, I just hope that we know that the current composition of the political economy of Nigeria just does not in any way prepare us to become a prosperous country anytime soon. And I say that because as a young person, the Nigerian political state is a carefully tended pet in the hand of the political elite. Nigeria works for them. Nigeria doesn't work for the rest of us. Now, when I say that, I mean that first, Africa, as it were, and the kind of operative democracies that we currently run, has a checkered history of being dominated by somewhat strong military undertones in a way that influence our economy greatly. And so when you think about a country, Africa, for example, is the youngest continent in the world, with the oldest number of leaders in the world as well. So 50% of the countries on this continent have leaders above the age of 70. And I wonder how people will continue to deliberate on a future they are not going to be part of. That is number one. Number two, there are four key drivers that determine the development and prosperity of any country. The first one is population, the second one is security, the third is economy, and the fourth is education. Nigeria and Africa consistently has failed, though through decades. Nigeria is the most populous black nation in the world. But what do we do when we have over 60% young people in a country, and those young people do not even have a voice on the agenda to contribute to policy making in Nigeria? We are in an era of the artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, but Nigeria's crude obsession with oil makes us refuse to consistently diversify into areas like agriculture, like entertainment, and like education, and like technology. So when you think about empowering young people, how do we create a value?
Let me put it back to you.
Yes, sir.
Young people are the majority of the voting age in our country. Why can't young people organize themselves and throw out the 70-year-olds?
The question is not whether you can throw out the 70-year-olds. The question is that in a situation where the same mind clamors for bread and books, bread will always win. And the political elite of this country have mastered the art because they know that 500 naira and 1,000 naira will make people sell their votes at the polling booth. And so it is not that we young people don't want to organize to take over from you, but it is that your generation has the money to keep our generation aground, and your generation has deliberately, sir, except for very few progressives like you, refused to give us the kind of education that will empower us to demand mandatory accountability from your generation. The kind of education that will help us to become innovative and drive competitiveness for Nigeria's economy. When you say that banks are giving loans to small businesses in Nigeria, The banks come with double-digit loans that are unaffordable for those small businesses. When you talk about youth and unemployment, the idea is not even youth unemployment. The idea is that youth unemployability is a greater challenge above youth unemployment. When you do not empower our generation to speak English so that we can get the right kind of jobs that will help us stand side by side by Singapore, Finland, and Canada, you deprive us of our fundamental humanity.
I agree with you, don't worry.
And I'm sorry, Professor Batitomi, I do not mean to be combative or to be activist. This is a platform for reasonable conversation.
Absolutely.
But I believe that young people like me get the opportunity to speak through to power only once in a while. And I stand here for an entire generation. I cannot curry it for the old people. The policy makers, the captains of industry, the people who make decisions in private companies to sponsor reality shows and refuse to sponsor youth empowerment programs, they sit in this room. And it is therefore important that I put the voice of my generation on the agenda, because I know you people are.
That's why I started with you. Give me a break. I started with you because I know that. Now, I'll move to Dr. Lokpa. Now, TLC has put her finger on one of the major problems of Nigeria, the problem of state capture. It's an African problem. I go back and forth South Africa every couple of weeks, and they've been shouting about state capture in South Africa, the Guptas, and all of that. But it's worse in Nigeria. How can we break out of this state capture that leaves Nigeria continuously being manipulated by those I call the class of 1966?
Thank you very much, Professor Tomi, and happy birthday. Now, I'd like to tweak the submission of Toyosi a little. I'd like to start by saying that happily, leadership challenge, leadership deficit is a global phenomenon. Of course, that statement validates Anthony Leaikoka's seminal question and title of his bestseller, Where Have All the Leaders Gone? Now, this is brought home to us in Africa or in Nigeria when I tried to interrogate the Mo Ibrahim Governance Index and the difficulty that the Foundation's Prize Committee had in selecting winners among African leaders. And I asked the question whether the African region was really unable to produce a leader that made a difference, or is it that the standards which African leaders are held up to are too high or realistic given the peculiar, climate that defines the polity in Africa? Now, so I do not want to refer to the Nigerian case. I think Nigeria is a bad case. But if we have to generalize based on the reality in Nigeria, we will not capture the essence. I can then proceed to posit that why effective response to African talent hinge, as Dr. at the two earlier speaker and Babas competently submitted. We need to conceptualize the meaning of leadership and their qualification given African peculiar circumstances. Indeed, going by the Mo Ibrahim Governance Index, an effort at constructing indicators and indices against which performance of African leaders could be periodically measured, it is safe to submit that no matter how great leadership can be by itself, it cannot by itself improve the economic and social prospect of the people. And my submission would be that going forward, and going by the experience of across the continent in the last decade, development hinge or hang on one, how candidates for political leadership positions are selected and how they are succeeded as much as on how they perform. I will then submit in conclusion at this level by saying, going forward, my take is that Africa needs, like Toyosi has said, a new generation of leaders. A new core of leaders distinguished by their managerial sophistication and policy intelligence, who could, in spite of the fragile political climate, deepen and consolidate the celebrated positive economic growth leverages to ignite structural transformation. A new generation of leaders that are cosmopolitan, detribalized patriots who could inspire by example and create new influential crop of elites that will drive economic debate to ignite required transition from foreign-inspired policies to locally driven agenda. This new crop of leaders will be able, with the force of vision, professionalism, passion, commitment, and intellection, distill the compelling proposition in the African political economies that could shape new ideologies with regards to the role of market relative to the role of the state. This will be an African alternative to Washington consensus-inspired neoliberalism. And I think for me, the proposition by Baba Obasanjo in his much celebrated and the need for a task force resonates within that conceptual framework, because the two parties that we have in Nigeria, for example, recycles the same old people whose understanding of Nigeria is still rooted in ethnic assumptions. And so we need, but it is possible from all the regions of Nigeria to raise cosmopolitan and people who have leadership sophistication to be able to look beyond their parochialism and be able to think Nigeria and use competence and professionalism, leveraging good practices around the world to take Nigeria forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, as we progress coming from Toyosi, we see a real issue of a crisis of legitimacy for Africa's leaders. Because the African people do not believe their leaders actually represent the will of the people, whether it is called a democracy or not, there's a crisis of legitimacy for leadership on the continent. And when you have that legitimacy crisis, it is hard to be able to mobilize the people to develop. What do we do about this? I mean, most times we talk and we don't even register to vote. If all we can do is ensure that every Nigerian truly registers and votes and defends that vote, we will change these things. Why is that not happening? Barrister Naji, why?
Thank you, Prof. Let me start by congratulating you on your birthday, and also congratulating you for providing this forum for exchange of ideas, and letting these ideas be value-driven, in the sense that it is strategically designed to change our minds towards something more positive. It is said that the mind has might over matter. Therefore, when you invest into your mind, the material world will no longer remain the same. It can only be for the better. That was why the classical philosophers of the old talked about cultivating the mind. But since we are not in a philosophy class, I would go straight to the issue of leadership, which in any case has a conceptual and philosophical basis. Because if you even took Plato in his the state, the republic, where leadership was taken as one critical portion, how do you train, how do you recruit, and how do you deploy leadership? That is the crisis Africa and more so Nigeria is going through. Do we cultivate our leaders, or do they just emerge and impose themselves, sometimes through brute force or some ethnic or religious hegemony. And that is the crisis of legitimacy you talked about. Because a leader is supposed to be the epitome, the best of those that he is leading or he claims to lead. The best must be in front. That is what leadership is about. You cannot see the third grade in a class being the class monitor, even as at that level. You always go for those who will be able to make the required credits because they need time to do other extracurricular activities. So the crisis of leadership in Africa, and which is holding us back, because I agree very, very much with the former president. They say that the wine gets better with age. Although in this country, some of the wines are never even aged before they are put on the table. So it is when those people who were called for the party to celebrate the wine with the wine are gone that the wine becomes aged and it will no longer be very useful. But I thank the opportunity created by the CVL in bringing the former president, who also has tried to remain relevant in terms of even improving himself. Because I say there is a lot of Adigboroja governance in Nigeria. If you get my drift, Adigboroja means gross and grotesque incompetence. Gross and grotesque incompetence in all its ramifications, but colored by certain other manifestations, either in violence, emasculations, exclusions, and ethnic cleavages, or some of those primordial cleavages that hold humanity hostage. Yeah. That's the stage we are in Nigeria. And that's why the leadership that always emerge are controlled by those people who know they don't have anything to offer and do not want anybody who is better to come on the stage, because that will be like an assessment, a direct assessment of their own failures. So if, like Prof said, the young people who constitute, just like the case of women, the women voters are said to constitute perhaps even 50 or a little more, and they have been consistent in voting, but the votes are usually split along certain primordial interests that have nothing to do with development. So the crisis of legitimacy will continue with us unless we change the course of events.
Thank you so much. Let's just move quickly to part of the new wine that you talked about. Mr. Buhari is a young, aspiring presidential option for our country. Now, without playing on the theme of substituting a Buhari for a Buhari, the big question, I think here, is one raised by President Obasanjo, which is the idea of a popular movement as different from parties that are essentially instruments for, essentially machines for capture of power rather than instruments of service. Because political parties in Nigeria are not political parties. If you go back to the basest understanding of the word political party, what we have cannot be called political parties. How do you intend to change that so that it is a popular movement that can essentially socialize people into certain value frames and enable the country of shared values to move in a new direction?
Thank you very much, Professor Patutomi. It's an honor. I appreciate the thought of having me be amongst this panel. And happy birthday to you. I wish you many, many more happy returns. First of all, I do represent an age bracket in this country that believes it's about time their power or responsibility is being moved from one generation to the other generation. In the course of this struggle, we met with past leaders, rulers, and people who count themselves as very important with regards to the polity in this country. And what we keep telling them is simple. If you do not allow responsibility move from one generation to the next generation as at when due, you will create a vacuum. When you create this vacuum can be filled up with anything. And in most cases, these people are unable to address the issues that are filled in this vacuum. So, as much as Nigerians and Africans will listen to this program and hear from us what we think can move us from where we are to the desired location, I think it is very paramount for us to understand that until we are prepared to pay for the kind of democracy that we get, we will be paid for the kind of democracy that we get. What does this mean? This means that as people in Africa, as Africans, as Nigerians who truly want to see our democracy thrive, we should be ready to sacrifice. We should be ready to pay. We should be ready to sit down like this for intellectually driven discussions where people will come and talk about their plans, their manifestos, and how they want to move Africa to the next level. We cannot just sit down and expect people to come and give us peanuts and decide our future. And if we're trying to whip up sentiments among and around that class of young people who do not go to vote, who watch TV and stay on Twitter to discuss the election results and things like that, then we're going to allow some other people who truly just want 50 naira, 100 naira to spend for 4 years, I don't know how that is possible, to decide our future. So as young people, it is our decision at this very important time to ask ourselves, why do you want to run our governance? What are you going to do differently? How do you intend to move us from this position to a position that is going to give us prosperity, economic viability, and all of those things that we want as a people? My generation, for one, is not concerned about the ethnicity or the religious divide that has bedeviled our people or our mindsets. I think what we are more concerned about is how we can leverage on our comparative economic advantages. Those comparative economic advantages are the things that we see as the space for us to key in and have a reason to have an harmonious relationship between the North, the South, the East, and the West, and as the case may be. We're not concerned about any fight. I'm not ready to fight anybody's war from the 1966 coup or prior to that or the Civil War. I think we should leave all of that aside. I think we should apologize for the people that were killed or fought in the Civil War or in the 1960s coup and say, you know what, it's time to move on. It's time for us to leverage on our comparative economic advantages. If after my visit to the clusters of leather manufacturers in Aba, and then the one I saw in Kano, in Sharada, in Kano, where this leather is being semi-processed, and I'm hearing from the manufacturers in Kano that they take this semi-processed leather all the way to Louis Vuitton, selling 3 meter by 3 meter for $3, when I know very well if Louis Vuitton takes it back home, they make about 6 to 8 pairs of shoes from that and sell them on the shelf for about $5,000. Why can't the government of Abia State and the government of Kano State have a synergy? If you do that, there is no reason why people in Kano will want to fight the Igbos. They will find a reason to connect. And like Yumkela presented the triangle. In reality, I visited the library in University of Ibadan, and what I saw shocked me. So the first republic in this country actually put together a well-documented infrastructure that is going to connect all the economic lines together. So from Lagos all the way to Ibadan, passing through Ilorin, passing through Niger State, terminating in Kaduna, a rail line that runs from Edo State, passing through Lokoja, Abuja, terminates in Kano, another one passing through from Warri all the way up to Benue, terminates in Kano, and then the last one from Cross River all the way to Maiduguri. Nobody continued any project like that. These are the projects that were put in place to ensure that we do not just connect by ethnicity, but we're also connected by economic potentialities that had been seen to move us from where we are to where we ought to be. I assure you, if everybody is belly full in this country, we will have no reason to fight. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much indeed. Let me turn to Ambassador Keshi with a very common sense question that has no common sense answer. And that question is, as Kande Yumkela put it, common sense has a limit. Have we passed the limit of common sense in this business of how we show our people a way forward. Put rather differently, to lead, you need knowledge. You need a sense of service, as Stephen Covey would put it. What is missing? Where are the knowledge gaps in the leadership elite as we see them in Nigeria? What is the sense of service gap that makes it difficult for us to be economically competitive as a continent, as countries in this continent? How did the Asians leave us behind? How did they identify what to do that made them make the kind of economic progress that they have made, and we have not managed to follow quite as we should?
Thank you very much, Pat, for your question. Like everybody else, let me start by saying happy birthday. And let me begin by answering your question this way. Over 20 years ago, I invited a young man to my residence in Sierra Leone. And over dinner, I pressed him, I encouraged him, and fondly said to him, you should run for the presidency of Sierra Leone, because I believe you can do something, and because I believe your country needs you. That young man was so scared. And he said to me, you are not serious, sir. You want to make me president of Sierra Leone? I said, yes, you can. Yes, I think this country, in a period of transition, needs you. Please give it a thought. Today, that young man is running for the presidency of Sierra Leone. He spoke to you all a few minutes ago. That's Kande Yemkwila. Today he says to me, you saw the vision 20 years ago for me. Let's be frank with ourselves. If I can find a young man like Kande in this country who can speak so eloquently from a global view, displaying his knowledge, experience, and everything that can move a country, I will vote for that candidate. It's not a question of the young, the old. No, it's a question of knowledge. It's a question of the leadership that knows what to do. It's a question of a leadership that can reorder a society. In summary, what Kande said to us this morning was very simple. If it took the Asians 50 years, if it took Singapore 8 decades to change, it should take us less than 2 decades. For simple reason, we are inventing nothing, copy and paste. That's what our leaders have not been able to do. So if you are talking of what could change, no, we've not lost common sense yet. My advice even to the young ones is, look, go back to school, not necessarily to the university. You see, we get carried away by distractions. We get carried away by hypes. A 39 years old was elected in France, and everybody gets up in this country, oh, the young must rule, the young must govern. But nobody looked at that man's history and the experience and the strength of the French institutions. Every institution you can point to in this country has virtually collapsed. For goodness sake, all our governors are young people. What's going on in our state? Nothing. No governor in this country is creating employment. So when we talk about all this leadership problem, it's time for the young people, we need to slow down and begin to say, how do we go from point A to point B? And I make the point again. We don't have to invent the wheel. What did they do in Singapore that we can do in this country? In November, we were with his vice premier of Singapore. He came late to the meeting because he spent 2 hours with one civil servant discussing his KPIs. And he said to us, the civil service is the strength of this country. and we do everything we can to make it so, to remain so. What did we do in this country? We've destroyed ours. Pure and simple. We've destroyed education. What else have we not destroyed? So we need to go find a place, find a leader who can say to us, we need to start all over again and rebuild these institutions. We need to take a second look at our education. For goodness sake, we go to the university today, we pay 20,000 for tuition, and we expect those same students to come out as good as those who pay more in other places. When you talk of increasing, students go on strike, but guess what? Students don't pay for education, their parents pay. Make their parents pay, they will stop a lot of their owambe and expensive ventures they undertake. Because that's what our parents did. They sacrificed for us to go to school. So, the future for me is still bright. There are enough young men and women who can change things. And I also make the point that experienced old men who can also help assist and advise them on how to go about it. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I'll do a one quick minute round, 1 minute with the panel, but one or two quick points. When President Obasanjo talked about President Obama's remarks on his first visit to Africa in Accra in Ghana, and he said, what Africa needs, strong institutions, not strong men. I've had this debate with my friend Bishop Kuka before, when he says, we need strong leaders too. I said, the concepts are being mixed up here. What Africa needs are strong institutions. Everybody accepts that. What Africa tends to do is build strong men, which is completely different from good leaders. Good leaders, which people can consider strong leaders, are valuable. In fact, they help build stronger institutions as the institutions emerge. But strong men are people who it is about them. And so when they are not there, well, people do other things because they are not there. And secondly, because they are strong men, the next strong man has to destroy what the other strong man stood for to be able to be accepted. So it creates discontinuities. I think it is important to make that point about the difference between strong men and good leaders. They're fundamentally different. Now, having made that point, let me return to the Asians and strategy. Ambassador Keshi was talking about the Asians. Take two examples I keep pointing out. South Korea, how did they change these things? One of the things they said to Nigeria's Electoral Commission when they visited them is, look, when we found our politics was the way yours is today, we decided that the path to leadership was through debates. Anybody seeking any position will debate on the streets, will debate in the high schools, will debate on television. By the time you go ideas to ideas, toe to toe, people who do not have ideas will run away from the leadership arena. That is what the South Koreans did in terms of their leadership selection process. And I reminded Professor Jerry Ghana, no, not sorry, was last next chairman, Jega, Professor Jega, when he was speaking at NIA 2 years ago about this. And he agreed. And I asked the question, why is our INEC not following that track? We talk about learning. So that's one. The other thing which Ambassador Keshi has raised is the importance of the quality of the public service, the civil service. I mean, that is an institution that we have significantly destroyed today because anybody that, nepotism, we just get people into place without capacity. Now, what can we do? And I'll go to Tunji on this. Dr. Lokba is the expert on the Nigerian bureaucracy and its evolution. How can we rebuild the civil service to be a center of excellence, that ministers come and they respect that the civil servant is their guide, not try to bully the public service?
Again, we return to leadership sophistication. And the best model that I like to push is not a very popular model. That is Margaret Thatcher, who sets the basis for modern UK. She rode on the whole debate on monetarism, managerial, and all of that. The need to import a bit of private sector sense to modernize. What did she do? Having been in, she's been in shadow cabinet, she's been in parliament. She knew the civil service was a problem. And she went, invited Lorena, who was the MD CEO of Marks and Spencer at the time. He said, we have built Marks and Spencer, we want to build the UK. Come and help us. And when Lorena did with a team of public administration specialists and put their finger on the pressure points, they said the first thing that must happen is that the labor union must cooperate. Incidentally, on the right, in the wing of that, there was a major strike in the UK. And so my first sense is that the public service that we have, that will take us, will depend on what the politicians want. Their definition of professionalism. Their definition, you see, what I see about the current model of managing Nigeria, which the likes of Abuya saw, and they saw they failed, was that we concentrate too much attention on designing strategies, calibrating vision, but we forget that the devil resides in the details, which is the execution trap. So for me, what we have been doing is to sidetrack the public service. And so for me, what needs to be done is that we need to face up, like Thatcher did, to the civil service of Nigeria. The strategies to use are in place. What we have is anything that can take Nigeria forward. If we do a simple workforce analysis of the public service, we'll discover that the civil service literally parade people who cannot even work with the sophisticated core that we are talking about. The second thing is that since the likes of Dr. Malayale and them work with Udoji, the struggle has been to transit from an impulse process-driven system to a system that can manage output and outcome, that can be managed by performance, that can be accountable like an MD or CEO of a company. So what do you need to do to that? It's not cast in stone. It's been done around the world. You can rethink the entire civil service in one day, but you need to negotiate and offload and change the character of people in the system to a more technocratic, more intelligent, more professional. Again, we must also establish the point. Public service will never be like industry where you earn the highest income. We need to, first of all, ignite a national productivity movement that recognizes that service delivery in Nigeria, whether you talk of public sector or private sector, is suboptimal. Is not able to rise to global standard, and consequently, the public service needs to use policy to create the climate. And the climate can only be created by people who are on top of their brief and are very professional. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I need to go to Toyosi and come back to Pakistan, Nigeria on a question of inclusiveness. Yeah. One of the big problems of Nigeria is that so many people feel excluded.
Yeah.
How can we create a more inclusive system? Because, you know, again, going back to Malaysia, the famous thing they borrowed from Lyndon Baines Johnson, Mahathir Mohamad, it's better for everybody to be inside the house, pissing out, than for some people to be outside the house, pissing into the house. What can we do in this mindset of governing in Nigeria? I can tell you for free, this morning, somebody called me and said she was appointed to be on a board. But it was said that her name showed up amongst those in one of those movements, NIM, this, and they removed her name. How do you create a mindset of inclusiveness in our country and prevent many people from being outside wanting to piece into the house?
Thank you, Professor Patutomi. I think the first thing that Nigeria must learn is that it is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Number one. Number two, based on logistics, there are two categories of young people in Nigeria today. The first category, the educated, empowered, and privileged. The second category, the poor, the deprived, and angry young people, who form the majority of the youth population you refer to, and are the ones that have become the tools of trade in the hands of the politicians. So we, the young people who are educated and can make the type of decisions and understand where Nigeria needs to go, are in our minority. The ones in the villages and the bushes who don't have education, who are poor and angry, who become area boys, do not even have food to eat 3 times one day. Now, where do we go from here? How do we promote inclusiveness? Nigeria and Africa have to become entities that embrace consequences. What do I mean by that? Consequences, when we begin to punish bad behavior in Nigeria, when people steal our money and we put them in jail, Nigeria and Africa will become better countries. I'll tell you why, sir. In Singapore, under Lee Kuan Yew, a minister bargained with a contractor and took money and took bribe from him to give him a contract. When Lee Kuan Yew found out, the minister committed suicide and left a note behind that he would rather die than face the consequences Lee Kuan Yew replaced them. In Nigeria, when people steal our money, we give them chieftaincy titles. When they steal our money, we give them doctorate degrees. Somebody said that the reason why rich people in Nigeria don't fund research is because there's no substance at the base of their wealth. Because abroad, it took Bill Gates to come and pay back the $76 million that Nigeria borrowed from Japan for polio, whereas Nigeria has the highest number of billionaires out of Africa. So when we do not place consequences side by side our actions, we do not send a strong message to the people who have stolen. How do we promote inclusiveness? Number one, we need to be able to embrace the principles of equality, where the children of the rich and the children of the poor can go to public schools, because public servants elevate the quality of education in the public schools. Number two, where the children of the poor can get jobs without having connections. When they go to University of Lagos and go to University of Ibadan, and they are given the same kind of jobs that people like me who went to Harvard University Kennedy School can get, that is when we become an equal country. A country where the children of the rich go to school abroad and come back to lead the corporations is not a country. We're just simply cohabiting. Why do I say that? As things currently stand, one day, during the Occupy Nigeria protest in 2012, the area boys didn't protest to Oshodi. They didn't go to Agege. They didn't go to Yanopaja. They went to VGC. They went to Ikoyi. They went to Lagos. They went to VR. It means that they know the homes where the rich people, the children of the rich people stay. And the truth is that in a country like this, where we continue to segregate and keep the children of the poor aground, this country is going to go up in flames one day. People are going to get to a point where they cannot take anymore. And people are going to get to a point where they cannot take anymore. When we create jobs, we cannot, within companies, we cannot decide that, for example, the children of the rich must be superior to the children of the poor. And as we continue to promote the ideas of diversity, of inclusion, of equality, we need to move forward and think about how to strengthen the economy of Nigeria by diversifying. Because Nigeria is not a rich country because we have oil. Countries are not rich because of what they have. Countries are rich because of their technical know-how. And Nigeria exports oil not because we are an oil-rich country. We export oil because oil is the only thing that we have to export. When do we begin to invest in our human capital development? the best doctors abroad, the best lawyers. The smartest web developers in the world come from Nigeria, but we will not pay them. We cannot afford to pay them in this economy. So Mr. Ambassador Jokeshi referred to empowering one young man, and today he's running for president. People like you, few people like you who empower young people like us are victimized, intimidated, and cut off from the line of power because you give us an opportunity. Now, when leaders begin to understand that the next generation does not constitute a threat to their existence, Nigeria will begin to move.
Okay. By the way, just a quick point. Ambassador Keshi wants to jump in there. Let me make a point. He talked about living in Sierra Leone 20 years ago and talking to a young man. He's not a Sierra Leonean.
No, I'm
I'm just.
He did so well. He validated the dream.
I'm not complaining about you. I'm just trying to explain why he was in Sierra Leone. That he was Nigeria's representative to ECOMOG.
No.
So, okay.
No, I just want to follow up what she said. Again, to make the point I made earlier, she said when people like Pat, I believe, are victimized, and no, Pat has never been victimized. Pat ran for the presidency, and perhaps nobody has ever done a good study why he lost. Pat lost because all the constituencies that Pat represented, worked for, inspired, betrayed him, including the youths. That is honest why he lost. Go do a study about it. I remember talking to a senior journalist who did not put part in a debate, and he said, oh, let him go and run, let him go and say that he will be made a minister. That mentality, that mentality has not changed today. So if the young people want to exercise their power, don't listen to those who say to you, we only do 2 or 3 things and the world will be okay. You need to challenge them to say more, just like you heard Candace say today about what he will do if he's given the opportunity to run Sierra Leone. That's the kind of leadership we are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Bystander on inclusiveness.
Well, let me start by saying that a rich man in the midst of poor people is a poor man. In the extreme case, he's a dead meat.
Yeah, true.
That is to start with. Now, we can debate issues about governance, poverty, and from now till next year. If we don't have the right leadership imbued with knowledge, knowledge has encapsulated in it some dosage of patriotism. A medical doctor will not likely treat his patient like a carpenter, because there are some code of professional practice, some inherent values in the profession, which is why we refer to your academic degrees and whatever as your discipline. The expectation is that when you go through the meal of the academic grater, you come out a finished product, very well disciplined in your own area of, maybe, let me just say, your own area of study. Your study area may be different from your calling, ultimately. So when you have people who do not understand what education even is about, beyond that they see people carry books and slates to school and come back perhaps anytime later, they cannot give value. You can't give what you don't have. A leadership produces followership. A ruler produces compliance. And compliance is only when you have eternal presence of monitoring or coercive forces to keep vigil on those people who you are trying to monitor. But a leader lives in the mind of those whom he leads, because he's one of them, and he champions the best of their causes. You cannot see a medical doctor who is the maybe chairman of the Nigerian Medical Association of any branch discussing about how Nigerian Road Workers Union will improve their activities in the motor park, except it has to do with the practice of medicine. So he champions the cause of those whom he leads, or she leads, as the case may be. What do you have? When you have an incompetent leadership, government has the coercive means of violence. They have the monopoly of violence. They disarm everybody, and if they are not patriotic, they will infuse violence against the people. So when you have people who are not competent, they will stew up one problem here or one problem in other place, exclude people, divide and rule, just to keep themselves in power in perpetuity. Now, poverty is real. Make no mistake about it. We can celebrate how we can talk about how to win ourselves of poverty and so on, but it's real. If you have a village, a graduate who is in the village with his first class and all the hope that when if he graduated, he was going to have a good job. If he had to go back to his parents, who eked out a living to keep him in that school, to begin to farm at a subsistence level, sooner than later he will intellectually atrophy and even will be unemployable. So when somebody comes campaigning and promises him that I will make you local government chairman if you vote for me, he'll fall for it, no matter the seminar or symposium he may have attended in the past. Poverty is real. So what we should be talking about are those things that will change the system, because the whole is always greater than the sum of its parts.
Thank you.
If the system remains this way, like you even talked about civil service, you can't single out the civil service and leave the larger society, because the demands are made from the larger society for them to steal.
Thank you so very much. The final contribution on the same subject from Mr. Buhari.
Thank you, Prof. So, for me, I am a young boy who came out from a rural state. The village I came out from was, at the time, even didn't have electricity. I lost my father at the age of 12, and I was left with a mother who had to raise 6 children. So, we have to understand certain things. When we look at a country and we're thinking of how best it can work, in my opinion, I think basically it has to have properly put together a robust educational system. If the educational system is not properly put together, I don't know how we're going to move forward from there. We have to put properly put together economic class, and this economic class has to be supported by policies that are being developed by the government. And the third part of the situation is we have to have a proper judicial system that would ensure that people who do the wrong things are put to book and then at the right place, as the case may be. And the fourth thing, as I keep saying, is a proper security system that will ensure that the sovereignty of the country is intact. But all of this will not happen if we do not have a properly elected political class. Truly, the elected political class is at the bottom of the table of the list I just mentioned, but it's actually the most important, because at the end of the day, the National Assembly, the executive, are the ones who decide what happens to all of us. So we can sit down here and talk about all the things we want to talk about. We can sit down here and say the things Professor Patutomi said about 15, 20 years ago when he was running for presidency, and nothing will happen if we do not have the right political class that would ensure that all of these things put together are working. And for Ambassador Keshi, who came at us saying that we're too young and we should go back to school and get studied, I don't know if he said that to his friend when he was running some years ago. So the truth of the matter is this, Ambassador. Do you want us to engage in public, intellectually driven campaigns and discussions and debates and know if we have the capacity to run and deliver as young people? I would look at this country when I was growing up in the late 70s and early 80s. I think the system was even better than it is now. And at that time, there were younger people running the system. So I am telling you again very clearly, the same people who have held on to power for so long, who you seem to happen to be proud of, have not been able to provide us the possible solutions that we see us looking to a better destination. My generation is sick and tired of hearing the same rhetoric that we're not prepared. We are prepared and we want to take on the mantle. And I don't care what anybody is going to say about this. We're still going to be running for office of the president in 2019. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for a robust conversation here. I guess Ambassador Keshi actually has a lot to say, but just before he says something, let me say that the challenge that I find in Nigeria is that we are all involved in an unholy conspiracy. Sometimes because we don't really reflect enough, we are involved in this unholy conspiracy. First of all, it's the same Nigerian who says to you, those people are terrible, why go into politics? Who will say, why is there bad governance? The same Nigerian who says, why go to vote? They will rig the thing. Who complains about everything? All of us are accountable. All of us are responsible. Don't take yourself out of blame. Exactly. You are the reason we are the mess that we are. Ambassador Keshi.
Well, let me start by correcting Buhari, I think. I think I was very emphatic when I said, I do not mean go back to the university, but that they should look at what others have done, acquire the experience and knowledge on how to reorder a society. Look, in this country today, all the noise we are making about is for power. My late Professor Dudley used to pose a question to us in the university. Power for whom and for what? Nobody is answering that question. Again, I repeat, if you want to rule this country, acquire the same level of knowledge, experience, that will enable you to understand governance, that will enable you to understand how to change society. And the point I made is, any leader who wants to be like Kande, who is knowledgeable about the world, and look, he kept referring to Laos. I don't know how many of you are young enough or old enough to remember what happened in Laos or Vietnam. These were countries that were practically destroyed by the Americans during the Vietnamese War. Today, they are climbing up the ladder and becoming one of the advanced countries. We did not go through that experience. So, I'm saying to those who want to rule this country, because whether we like to, and I can tell you this, and quote me, some of you do know, I know for a fact that our leaders don't read. I know for a fact that our leaders don't read. I also know the young ones don't read. I also know. So please, for goodness sake, I repeat again, go back to school. Acquire the experience. Try to be mentored. Look for somebody who will mentor you. Look, in this country, we need to be serious about where we want this country to do. Let's leave emotion. Let's leave this hyperbole of ruling and so on. Let's go back to that question. Those who want power, what do they want to do with that power? Over the last couple of years, we've seen people go for power. Where are we? We are still at the bottom of the ladder. So we need to change that mindset. You know, see, it's like taking somebody who is not, who just got a half education to become a doctor. You are endangering your life, and that's where we are in this country. So again, I make the point. We need education. We need good leaders, well-educated, cosmopolitan, as my colleague said, who can reorder and change society. And by the way, to add to his point, there are enough rules and regulations in the civil service to make the civil service of Nigeria today stronger institutions. So when we talk of leadership, let's not focus only at the political leadership. Let's focus at all other levels, because there are also leadership deficiencies at that level. And except we begin to address them by giving somebody and holding every leader of the permanent secretaries, the director generals, let's hold everybody accountable and responsible for what they do. We have a better country. Thank you.
Prof, please.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Let me close by saying here that we have all of us, to take some responsibility for the future of this country. And that should begin with saying to yourself, I have to register to vote, and to make sure that at least 10 people around me, because of me, register to vote. That's one. That's the beginning of responsibility. The second thing is to stop thinking that titles, positions are the things that matter. One of the most important programs of the Center for Values in Leadership is called the Leader Without Title Tribute Series. The people who have made the most important difference in this world did not have a title. They were not called president. They were not called governor. But the influence they had on their environment proved to be profound. Mahatma Gandhi, when you say India, the first name that comes to the mind of anybody is Gandhi. Gandhi was never a party chairman. Gandhi was never a minister. Gandhi was never Prime Minister of India. If we can commit all to the fact that we were born to lead, and that our personal example will make a difference in our country, we will not worry about what titles we have, and we will change and save our country. Thank you. God bless you. It's a privilege.
Sir. Okay, please.